Friedrich Nietzsche is someone that I've spoken about before on my channel, and as I've spoken about, I have conflicting feelings about. There's sort of two readings of Nietzsche that come across to me when I read him, and I'm starting with this because he's been on my mind recently. On the one hand, in Nietzsche, you can find a more misogynistic, narcissistic, purity-obsessed, megalomaniacal kind of voice. This is someone. Let's see here. Let's pull up Ecce Homo. Ecce Homo. This is his autobiography. Ecce Homo. Behold the man, from Friedrich Nietzsche. Chapter 1, Why I Am So Wise. Why I Am So Clever. Chapter 3, Why I Write Such Excellent Books. This is the type of person we're talking about. And the misogyny that comes across in every line, not every line, of course, but in a lot of his works. And some of that you could just chalk up to, changing times. But a lot of people, wrote books around this time period, the early 1900s. They don't all sound like Friedrich Nietzsche does. Extremely elitist, a sense of disdain for people, disdain for the common herd, deep disdain, a sense that his books cannot be understood by anyone. His books are over the heads of every reader, and on and on. Him being a very weak and sickly person, and always laid low by illness and all sorts of things, and fetishizing war and fetishizing strength. And yeah, I mean, that's sort of one reading. That's like one perspective of Nietzsche. He is very anti-political, and disdains democracy and the idea that people should contribute towards a more egalitarian future. Things that I don't agree with, but have a lot of purchase today, and there's a certain an audience for that today. And Nietzsche is very popular with a certain type of audience. A second reading of Nietzsche, which is also there in the text, is more interesting, right? There's another part of this character. And he writes in Ecce Homo, his biography, the sense in which he could not possibly comprehend the religious instinct. The religious instinct is so constitutionally, fundamentally foreign to him that there's just nothing in there that he can even, like I said, comprehend. And that's fairly interesting, right? I mean, there's lots of people who are atheistic. That's not so interesting. But what is interesting is to be of a certain mind where it's not like you've come to the rational conclusion of atheism. There's atheists and there's theists and there's agnostics, and then there's Nietzsche. He's different. Let's see if we can find this clip here. Why do I know more things than other people? Why, in fact, am I so clever? I have never pondered over questions that are not questions. I have never squandered my strength. Of actual religious difficulties, for instance, I have no experience. I have never known what it is to feel sinful. That's fairly interesting. And we don't have to necessarily. A tricky thing when reading someone like Nietzsche is we have to ask ourselves, to what extent do we trust him? To be honest about these things. But I think if we're gonna get anything out of Nietzsche, we have to trust him, right? Nietzsche says he doesn't know what it means to feel sinful. In the same way, I completely lack any reliable criterion for ascertaining what constitutes a prick of conscience. That's very foreign to most people. That's very foreign to me. That's very foreign to most readers. And we have a choice. Do we want to take this seriously or not? You could say he's a psychopath, maybe. There might be some truth to that. From all accounts, a prick of conscience does not seem to be a very estimable thing. He goes on in this regard. What else can we say about Nietzsche? He's a critic of morality and utilitarian morality. And as my own thinking has evolved over the years, I've come to see a lot of beauty in that. Nietzsche argues that morality is ultimately egoism. Anyone who's, I think of modern day, what's what I'm looking for? People who are trying to maximize the goodness in the world that they do, and And a lot of it just, Nietzsche sees through that. It's just trying to people trying to feel good about themselves. Nietzsche's idea of the eternal recurrence, this yes to life, this infinite embrace of life. He wants to be someone who says yes to everything. The sense that God is dead, meaning is dead, but Nietzsche wants us to sort of become the source of our own meaning and make this unreserved embrace of everything. And ultimately, Nietzsche in his own life was a staunch anti-Nazi. So, he was against anti-Semitism. So for all his rhetoric of hierarchy and purity and weird stuff about races and all these things, when push came to shove, he didn't practice what he preached when it came to being anti-political. He was political. To be anti-Nazi at the time where he lived, when Nazism was on the rise, was a political stance. Absolutely political stance. So these are sort of the two sides of Nietzsche. So what is the short story Funes the Memorious, or Funes his memory, right? It's a famous classic Borges short story about this character, Ireneo. Okay. Ireneo Funes. And Borges has an encounter with him in a few different times, before and after an accident. He has a fall from a horse, which leaves him bedridden. And after that accident, Funes describes it as a great, wonderful thing to happen to him, because he discovers or he achieves a perfect recall, perfect memory. This character of Funes is often compared to other examples of people in the real world with prodigious memories. Someone that I've seen cited again and again whenever I read someone who mentions Funes Memorious is this character of Solomon Shereshevsky, mnemonist, someone who he would do shows for his incredible memory. And he was written up by this neurophysiologist, Alexander Luria. And people cite him as an example of someone who was an inspiration for the character of Funes. So there's this, motivation. There's this inspiration you can get from real people who have these sort of savant skills, these savant memories. I'm not so interested in those comparisons. It's interesting to read about Shereshevsky. It's interesting to read about what was going on there. There's a lot of controversy in the scientific and psychological literature about memory, what is and isn't, what has and has not been achieved, what has and has not been verified. Shereshevsky, would go on to be like a wandering, a carnival show with his memory. And so that and sort of the lack of, rigorous studying of his memory outside of the, testimonies of Alexander Luria, it casts a lot of skepticism, a lot of doubt on what his abilities were. And I think most people assume that in the case of Shereshevsky and other cases of savant memories, you're dealing with brains that are able to instinctively use the kind of techniques, visualization techniques that make prodigious feats of memory possible in like memory competitions, feats that anyone can, skills that anyone can learn, like a memory palace, all sorts of visualization techniques for memorizing numbers, for example. And so all this is to say that a case like Funes, despite some of the hype around someone like Shereshevsky, isn't something that exists in the real world, right? There is no Funes of the real world, not even close. People like Shereshevsky seems to have had a very profound synesthesia, so that words and numbers would stimulate all sorts of senses in his body. And so ultimately what this gives him is, a certain creative, imaginative apparatus at work that allows him to do incredible feats of recall, but they're not, above and beyond what other people can learn, and they're not super metaphysical in the way that Funes is. Funes is doing something different. Funes's recall is not really something that we can call memory the way we think of it, So again, I think when people make too strong a connection between cases like Shereshevsky and Funes, seeing in it more than just an inspiration that Borges might have had, I think they're either misunderstanding the Shereshevsky or they're misunderstanding the Funes. What Funes is able to do is something profoundly different. He's able to inhabit his memory like he inhabits the real world. he's able to erase sort of the distinction between memory and experience, memory and reality. So let us jump into the story. I remember him. I have no right to utter this sacred verb. Only one man on earth has had that right, and he is dead. So I remember him with a dark passion flower in his hand, seeing it as no one has ever seen it. Though he might look at it from the twilight of dawn till the evening, a whole lifetime, right? So in the first sentence, this invocation of memory, which is ultimately what we're going to be discussing, and additionally, an invocation now of the looking, of the seeing, of a different experience of reality. This is a story, the story is as much about perceiving, I would argue, as it is about memory. Before we go any further, we think about, what is memory? Memory is our identity, right? We could do a thought experiment, and we can say, if you do a brain transplant from one person to another, so that you now have one body, and you move the brain, we assume that the identity goes with the brain and not with the body, right? We're not our bodies, we assume we're our brains. And you could dig into that further, and you could say if you did brain transplants with people, or you upload someone to the metaverse, so now they're a digital copy of themselves. When do you know if you succeed? When do you know if you fail? Ultimately, the criteria is do you take their memories with them? If you upload them to the metaverse but they lost their memory, then we would say you didn't succeed. You didn't carry that person into the metaverse. They no longer exist. Because to some extent we are our memories. Our memory is our identity. So this short story collects different perspectives on Funes. And this perspective here jumps out at me, and we're going to come back to this. Pedro Leandro Ipuche, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that. Ipuche, I don't know, has written that Funes was a precursor of the Supermen, a vernacular and rustic Zarathustra. Borges says, I shall not debate the point, but one should not forget that he was also a kid from Fray Bentos, with certain incurable limitations, right? This is a crucial dichotomy that I want to come back to. On the one hand, Borges is grappling with these two perspectives, these two readings of Fuentes. He's a Superman. He's gotten somewhere. He's achieved something that no man has achieved. There's something superhuman about him. And we'll think more about what exactly that means. And we're going to come back to this question, what is Nietzsche's Superman? What made Nietzsche so unique? But also, he's extremely limited, which Borges is going to come back to. My first memory of Funes is very perspicuous. I can see him on an afternoon in March or February of the year 1884. My father that year had taken me to spend the summer in Fray Bentos. I was returning from San Francisco Ranch with my cousin Bernardo. We were singing as we rode along, and being on horseback was not the only circumstance determining my happiness. Skipping, I remember the cigarette in his hard face against the now limitless storm cloud. Bernardo cried to him unexpectedly, "What time is it?" Ireneo, without consulting the sky, without stopping, he replied, "It's 4 minutes to 8. Young Bernardo Juan Francisco. His voice was shrill and mocking. Okay, this was before Funes' accident, and Borges is amazed at his timekeeping ability. I think Funes asks us to think about this ability. Borges understands a relationship between this ability of Funes to keep time, to track time, and what happens to him after his accident, his skill of memory. How do we relate to time? For us, time is very variable. You know, if you run an experiment with someone, you've stopped them randomly, asked them to tell you the time, generally they can't do it. People like myself, I assume most people, really have a hard time, knowing what time it is. It could be off by hours in some extreme cases, because time goes fast and time goes slow. Sometimes we notice time passing, and sometimes we don't notice time passing. But Funes has this ability to track time. In my own life, just speaking personally now for a second, noticing this duality between presence and absence, I found to be very fruitful and very helpful. When am I here and when am I not here? I'm here when I notice time. I'm here when I can feel time passing. I'm here when I'm just not doing anything to some extent. I'm just noticing that I'm here. And I'm not here most of the time. I'm not here when I'm in my thought or I'm thinking about something engaging or I'm checking my phone, And in some sense, Funes is someone who's here, who has a presence. He's plugged into the passage of time in a way that human beings in general are not. Funes has an accident and he's stuck in bed. And by being stuck in bed, he undergoes a transformation. From the outside, people pity him. But Funes says that it was a great thing. Borges visits Funes again in the future. He carried his pride to the point of acting as if the blow that had fallen him were beneficial. Twice I saw him behind the iron grating in the window, which harshly emphasized his condition as a perpetual prisoner. Once motionless with his eyes closed, another time again motionless, absorbed in the contemplation of a fragrant sprig of Santonica. In Eastern culture and spiritual traditions, from what I understand, there's more of an awareness of meditation as an activity which can be useful or can be transformative. In the West, in my cultural context, there seems to me to be less of an awareness of that. But sometimes people are forced to meditate. Sometimes people can choose to meditate. They can choose to go on a retreat. They can choose to, like the opening of Moby Dick, to go and abandon the hustle and bustle of the modern world that they live in and just sort of find solitude and find silence. Or that could be thrust upon them. And sometimes a fascinating thing can happen. Whether it's chosen or it's thrust upon you, these experiences of solitude, of inward turning, can be very transformative. And a person who had such an experience that was apparently extremely transformative is none other than Friedrich Nietzsche. And I would suggest that a key to making sense of what happened to him, to making sense of his worldview, is understanding and appreciating this element of his biography. So let's pull up Ecce Homo again. This is the very beginning, towards the beginning, of Nietzsche's biography. And he's talking about his own spiritual and intellectual development. He described being, working in academia, being in a very sort of dead-end kind of place, doing philology, not particularly happy with his work, not doing anything particularly important or productive. And he says, at this juncture, there came to my help in a way that I cannot sufficiently admire, and precisely at the right time, that evil heritage which I derive from my father's side of the family, and which at bottom is no more than a predisposition to die young. Illness slowly liberated me from the toils. It spared me any sort of sudden breach, any sort of violent and offensive step. At that time, I lost not a particle of the goodwill of others, but rather added to my store. Illness, likewise, gave me the right completely to reverse my mode of life. It not only allowed, it actually commanded me to forget. It bestowed upon me the necessity of lying still, of having leisure, of waiting, and of exercising patience. But all this means thinking. The state of my eyes alone put an end to all bookwormishness, or in plain English, philology. I was thus delivered from books. For years I ceased from reading, and this was the greatest boon I ever conferred upon myself, right? This is so similar to Funes. He's saying I was sick, I was laid low, I was stuck in bed, I couldn't read, I was half blind, and it was the greatest boon I ever conferred upon myself. That nethermost self, which was, as it were, entombed, and which had grown dumb because it had been forced to listen perpetually to other selves, for that is what reading means, slowly awakened. At first it was shy and doubtful, but at last it spoke again. Never have I rejoiced more over my condition than during the sickest and most painful moments of my life. Funes's memory is a weakening, is a breaking between the distinction of experience and memory. In our day-to-day life, we take for granted that experience is one thing and memory is something else. Funes, memory is elevated to the level of reality. In our minds, in our day-to-day way of thinking, we have reality and we have getting lost in thought, getting lost in memory, getting lost in imagination. But Borges is an idealist. We know this from, I think, all of his fiction, certainly from his essays. For example, A New Refutation of Time and other places. Borges doesn't agree. He doesn't accept distinctions between reality and dream. From Borges' perspective, whatever is in the mind is real. And so from Borges' perspective, when we're experiencing right now, we're experiencing right now, and that's real. And when we're experiencing a dream, we're just experiencing the dream, and that's real. And just that like a dream is a dream, this is also a dream. It's all made of mind stuff, And when you're in memory, you are just in memory, and that's real, and that's all there is. And so through the character of Funes, through this sort of analogy, I think there's an expression of a Borgesian idea that whatever is here is what's real. If what's here is memory, if what's here is imagination, if what's here is a thought, or if what's here is worry or a mental picture or whatever, that's what's real. That's your reality. That's all there is. There's nothing outside that. And Funes apprehends that in a way that most of us would struggle to, because Funes is able to enter his memory and have such a clear vision of the past that is indistinguishable from the present. This is the conversation that Borges has with Ireneo. He told me that before that rainy afternoon, when the blue-gray coursed through him, he had been what all humans are: blind, deaf, addle-brained, absent-minded, right? By comparing our memory to Funes's memory, we're able to notice how completely insufficient, how completely incapable and ineffective human memory is. There's sort of a profound optical illusion. We all take for granted our capacity of memory. We trust our memory. Our memory is the seat of our identity. I would go even further and to say it's also the seat of our consciousness. Because if you experience something but you don't remember it, to what extent did you even experience it? And so memory, which is the most important grounding, fundamental principle of who we are, is so incomplete. If you ask someone randomly, what did you do 10 days ago at 2 o'clock? What's the likelihood they would be able to answer that without checking a phone or a calendar? Or what did you do yesterday at this time? I mean, all time is lost time for us, for regular people. That's what Funes wakes up to. That's what he realizes. For us, all time is lost time. Every moment that passes is not remembered. Every moment that passes is completely forgotten. Of a whole wonderful day, excursion, memorable event in your life, how many just little snapshots of that day do you have? It took Funes being able to recall all of it to realize how blind, deaf, addle-brained, and absent-minded regular human consciousness is. We get nothing of those experiences. We retain nothing. For 19 years, he had lived as one in a dream. He looked without seeing, right? This is the key. This is what I said in the beginning. This is as much about seeing, experiencing, as it is about memory. He looked without seeing, listened without hearing, forgetting everything, almost everything, right? This is our condition. Looking without seeing, listening without hearing, and forgetting everything. When he fell, he became unconscious. When he came to, the present was almost intolerable in its richness and sharpness, as were his most distant and trivial memories. Okay? Now what I want to do is I want to find another Nietzsche analogy. Back to Ecce Homo. Nietzsche, even my eye trouble, which sometimes approached so perilously near to blindness, was only an effect and not a cause. This is again Nietzsche talking about his sickness, his illness, his frailty. For whenever my general vital condition improved, my power of vision also increased. Having admitted all this, do I need to say that I am experiencing questions of decadence? I know them inside and out. Even that filigree art of prehension and comprehension in general. That feeling for delicate shades of difference. That psychology of seeing through brick walls and whatever else I may be able to do was first learnt then, and is the specific gift of that period during which everything in me was subtilized, I think became more subtle. Yeah, it was more refined, more subtle, subtilized. Observation itself, together with all the organs of observation. He describes the sort of waking up from his blindness, from his illness, and seeing things new. Everything being more vibrant, more powerful, which again is similar to Funes' experience. Of course, Funes also has this perfect memory ability. Somewhat later, he learned he was paralyzed. The fact scarcely interested him. He reasoned, he felt that his immobility was a minimum price to pay. Now his perception and his memory were infallible. We're going to get a specific example of this. Here's a specific example of Funes' perception. We, at one glance, can perceive 3 glasses on a table. Funes, all the leaves and tendrils and fruit that make up a grapevine. Funes doesn't just see what's on the table, he sees where it came from. He sees the past in the present. It's a totally different way of perceiving and inhabiting the world. It's a heightened sense of perception, a heightened sense of reality. This reminded me, when I read this, of a talk from Thich Nhat Hanh. Nourishing your mother and father in you. An hour and a half. 9 minutes and 30 seconds into this beautiful talk. He's pouring tea. And he's talking about the experience of drinking tea. So he says he's pouring the tea mindfully.
And when I do it mindfully, I see that this tea has come from a cloud. Yesterday it was a cloud in the sky. But today it is tea. So there is a connection between the cloud and the tea. And when you look at the tea, and if you don't see the cloud, you have not really seen the tea.
He says, if you look at the tea and you don't see the cloud, you have not really seen the tea.
You believe that you see the tea, but you have not really seen the tea. You have to see the cloud still alive in the tea. The cloud has not died. It simply becomes the tea, or the ice, or the rain, or your ice cream. So next time when you eat the ice cream, your ice cream, look more deeply and see a cloud in your ice cream. That's meditation. Meditation allowed us to see things that other people cannot see. So when you look into the tea,
we can stop there. But what he says so beautifully is, meditation allows us to see things that other people cannot see, right? It's again this, Funes, like Nietzsche, they go through this period of forced meditation. And they come out of that able to see things that other people cannot see. Funes sees all the leaves and tendrils and fruit that make up a grapevine when he looks at the cups on the table. When you watch something like this by Thich Nhat Hanh and others, there's a question which, comes up and people wonder about, and I wonder about, and it's a fair question, is, to what extent is this like a nice little exercise that is sort of a healthy, psychologically, useful way to train your brain to sort of, produce more mindfulness and focus? And to what extent, alternatively, is Thich Nhat Hanh trying to narrate something which is like qualitatively different, fundamentally different from our experience? And that I will, leave to you as an open question. But it's a question that, comes up with Nietzsche as well, who we're going to think more about. When he comes out of his experience and he says, I can now see for the first time, his eyes are opened. This was the greatest thing that happened to him, to be stuck in bed. And he wakes up from this with this vision of the Superman and this vision of an embrace of life, this new way of seeing. To what extent is that like a metaphorical? And to what extent is that meant to be like a fundamentally, qualitatively different mode of perception? In the book, Funes, in the short story Funes and Memorious, there's a description of Borges wants us to imagine this qualitatively different way of inhabiting the world, a qualitatively different way of seeing. And we can revisit that first sentence now. I remember him with a dark passion flower in his hand, seeing it as no one has ever seen it, though he might look at it from the twilight of dawn till that evening, a whole lifetime. Borges continues to narrate his experience with Funes. He tells us about the different projects that Funes sort of engaged in. One is of an infinite vocabulary for numbers, right? So he writes, the two projects I've indicated, an infinite vocabulary for the natural series of numbers, a useless mental catalog of all the images of his memory, are senseless. And they betray a certain stammering grandeur. Funes wanted to give a unique word to every number. It's senseless. It's a stammering grandeur. They permit us to glimpse or infer the nature of Funes's vertiginous world. He was, let us not forget, almost incapable of ideas of a general, Platonic sort. Not only was it difficult for him to comprehend that the generic symbol dog embraces so many unlike individuals of diverse size and form, it bothered him that the dog at 314 seen from the side should have the same name as the dog at 315 seen from the front. A different way of perceiving the world, right? A world where perception isn't mediated by labels, by language. An interesting character is Yuji Krishnamurti, who I enjoy reading about and reading from. He's sort of this anti-guru. He's very fascinating. Was a philosopher who questioned the state of spiritual liberation. Having pursued a religious path in his youth and eventually rejecting it, Yuji claimed to have experienced a devastating biological transformation on his 49th birthday, an event he refers to as the calamity. He emphasized that this transformation back to the natural state is a rare, acausal, biological occurrence with no religious context. Because of this, he discouraged people from pursuing the natural state as a spiritual goal. So there's a book called The Biology of Enlightenment, which is just conversations with Yuji, basically. Unpublished conversations. And these are strange. Yuji's a super strange guy. A bit of a, he loved to, like there's videos of him online where people come to visit him and ask him questions, and he just like yells at them and says, I have nothing for you. Why are you wasting my time, wasting your time? Anyway, so in one of these conversations, he describes, I'm reading, I printed it out for myself, so I don't have it pulled up right now. He says, the mind no more dictates my senses. It doesn't say what you must see or how you must see that flower and call it a rose. But it is there only if you want the name, like a reference book to supply words. Otherwise, you just look at the flower without naming it, and there's great intensity in it, right? This, again, the sense of Yuji claims, and it's up to the reader to, ask themselves to what extent is this, to what extent they want to believe this. But he claims to have fallen into a state with no cause, no religious context, where his experience is unmediated by language. There's the labels, he can pull them up if he needs them, but they don't apply. The mind doesn't overlay on top of experience labels. So he gets a question in this. These are back and forth questions. Hislop. I don't understand. I still don't understand. How the mind cannot interfere? Yuji says, the mind can never interfere. It is finished. The role of the mind as the dictator is over. It comes only at your bidding to supply factual memory, and when there is no use for it, it is gone. And there is silence, pure consciousness. Consciousness without thought. When there is the mind, there is the experience. But here there is nobody accumulating anything. It accumulated for 49 years, and then there is a full stop. And I think that is ultimately what Borges is describing. This lack of mediation that Funes falls into, where the label dog is no longer inserted into experience. You know, when we see a dog, he doesn't see a dog. He sees something completely new, completely unmediated by language. Swift relates that the Emperor Lilliput could discern the movement of the minute hand. Funes could continuously discern the tranquil advances of corruption, of decay, of fatigue. He could note the progress of death, of dampness. He was the solitary and lucid spectator of a multiform, instantaneous, and almost intolerably precise world. What I see in Funes is that to see clearly is to be able to see through the illusion of continuity, to see an instantaneous world, to see a world that stands on its own, to see just this moment, intolerably precise, that every moment is ultimately all there is. There's another beautiful Borges short story, one of my favorite, called The Immortal. I want to share with you a passage from The Immortal. The story tells about a character who mistakenly achieves immortality and then, weary of a long life, struggles to lose it. Towards the end of the story, Borges describes life among the immortals. What's it like to be immortal? You know, and it's a pressing question in a way, because we all want to be immortal to some extent, I think. I mean, some more, some less. You know, the techno bros of the modern age are all investing into companies that will try to extend our lifespans and achieve immortality. And, you know, Elon Musk wants, you know, to be uploaded into the metaverse and all that stuff. You know, this it's a kind of yes to life in a way, right? It's a kind of embrace of life. Borges introduces us to these immortals. What's it like to live forever? What happens when you live forever? So he says, quote, "Taught by centuries of living, the Republic of Immortal Men had achieved a perfection of tolerance, almost of disdain. They knew that over an infinitely long span of time, all things happen to all men. As reward for his past and future virtues, every man merited every kindness, yet also every betrayal, as reward for his past and future iniquities. Much as the way in games of chance, heads and tails tend to even out, so cleverness and dullness cancel and correct each other. Perhaps the rude poem of El Cid is the counterweight demanded by a single epithet of the Eclogues or a maxim from Heraclitus. The most fleeting thought obeys an invisible plan, and may crown or inaugurate a secret design. I know of men who have done evil in order that good may come of it in future centuries, or may already have come of it in centuries past. Viewed in that way, all our acts are just, though also unimportant," right? You have, I think, an echo here of something that Nietzsche wants us to do, right? To see through morality. All acts are just. If you live forever, everything evens out. Everything becomes acceptable. Everything becomes just, though also unimportant. There are no spiritual or intellectual merits. Homer composed the Odyssey. Given infinite time with infinite circumstances and changes, it is impossible the Odyssey should not be composed at least once. No one is someone. A single immortal man is all men. Like Cornelius Agrippa, I am God, hero, philosopher, demon, and world, which is a long-winded way of saying that I am not. When we think about immortality, I think people have a very limited kind of notion of what immortality would mean. You know, they want to be immortal, but they want to be themselves forever, you know, as if that was, you know, possible. But I think that this embrace of life in the Nietzschean sense, you know, this amore fati, Nietzsche's love of fate, this embrace of everything, to be immortal is not just to be immortal forever as I am right now, with this particular set of experience in this particular culture, in this particular world, on this planet, with this particular group of books, or whatever the case may be. To be immortal is to experience everything. It's to embrace everything. It's to be immortal is to experience every experience, including every experience of mortality, to experience every fear of death, and to experience every death. And I think all this is to some extent what Nietzsche saw. You know, I think I see echoes of this in his idea of the eternal recurrence. You know, Nietzsche's Zarathustra provides this idea of this vision. I think Nietzsche had this vision of life is just repeated forever and ever and ever. There is no death. And ultimately, I think that is the other side of this perception. I want to tie this back into to Funes. The other ability that Yuji has that comes across is this instantaneous sight, this instantaneous experience. So Hislop, this guy that's talking to Yuji Krishnamurti, says, "What is reincarnation?" Yuji responds, "I die this moment and then I am born again. So how can I be concerned about what will happen to me in the next life? When I die this moment, I know what death means. Every moment to me is a new moment and rebirth. There is nothing to think beyond this particular moment." He goes on, he says, those are the questions. He says this basically to all the questions, all the religious, spiritual questions. Those are the questions for individuals who do not live this way, from moment to moment. What is reincarnation? What is meditation? Why is one concerned about such things at all? That is my question. You talk to me about meditation, and I'll listen to you like I would anybody else in the world. It doesn't matter whom you are quoting or what you are saying. It doesn't make any sense to me, because I don't know, because whatever you are saying has no relation whatsoever with the state of being. I wanted to end on one last quote from Thich Nhat Hanh that I thought was very inspiring, very beautiful. And then my notes will be finished, and we'll probably close it. But this is just a nice way to end. I find very inspiring. So let's just a minute of Thich Nhat Hanh here, coming back to the cloud, and this question of death.
Has not died. When you look up into the sky, you don't see your cloud anymore. You might cry. You might like to cry. You have a beloved favorite cloud in the sky. And you used to contemplate her, to see her beauty. But this morning you don't see your beloved cloud anymore in the sky, and you want to cry. And you believe that your cloud has died. You have grief, sorrow, despair in you. But it is impossible for a cloud to die. A cloud can become snow, or rain, or ice, or tea, or ice cream. But it is impossible for a cloud to become nothing. So your beloved cloud is still there somewhere. Look deeply, and you will not cry anymore.
All right, yeah, so that's it. That's a beautiful message. I love that. You know, if you look deeply, you will not cry anymore, because a cloud can never die. Then I saw the face belonging to the voice that had spoken all night long. Ireneo was 19 years old. He had been born in 1868. He seemed to me as monumental as bronze, more ancient than Egypt, older than the prophecies and the pyramids. I thought that each of my words, that each of my movements would persist in his implacable memory. I was benumbed by the fear of multiplying useless gestures. Ireneo Funes died in 1889 of congestion of the lungs. All right. Thank you so much for joining me. on this live stream. I had a wonderful time. Hope to do it again soon sometime. Have a great day.